What is up, you guys? Welcome to my channel. My name is Ray, and today I'm gonna lift my GX470. So what I'm gonna be using on my GX is the TrailRunner USA coilover lift kit, and it's gonna come with the front and rear shocks with external reservoirs all the way around, and it also includes the brackets for the external reservoir and rear springs. So TrailRunnerUSA is a new off-road suspension company that's coming out very soon. I found out about them through one of my friends, Mama GX470, and she seems to be loving it on her GX. So I decided to contact them to grab a set since they had it in stock, and they're offering a pretty sweet deal on these coilover lift kits, especially because I have the coilovers with two different adjusters. So I'm able to adjust the compression and rebound on this. So what that means is I'm able to adjust the stiffness of how the suspension compresses, and with rebound you're going to adjust how fast it'll retract. So it's definitely nice to have adjusters so you can fine-tune your suspensions to maximize the performance, whether you're driving on the road or off-road terrains. So here's a quick rundown on the specs for the TrailRunner shocks. So they use a 2.5-inch aluminum 7075 body, as well as Japanese seals and O-ring, and German racing oil, and as well as high-strength 35 chromoly rods. So what I'm also going to be using with my lift kit is the aftermarket Upper Control Arms from SPC. It's recommended that you run aftermarket Upper Control Arms when you lift your truck about at least 2 inches. It's going to help with wheel travel, as well as correcting the geometry of the suspension. What I like about SPC Upper Control Arms, you can easily adjust the caster, so I'm going to be able to move the wheel forward, which will help me when I run 33s on the car. So I'm able to get a little bit more clearance from the body mount, and I shouldn't have any major rubbing issues. What I'm also going to be using for my GX is a rear coil conversion kit from Apache Off-Road, since I'm going to be using the springs. So I'm going to be getting rid of those leaky OEM airbags. What I'm also going to be installing is this sway bar drop bracket from Icon right here. It's two billet spacers right here pretty much, and what it does is it lowers the sway bar and it shifts it forward to give it extra clearance from the shock, because once you lift the truck, if you're not using a drop bracket or I think longer end lengths, when it compresses, the strut will be touching the sway bar pretty much, and with this kit it'll pretty much give it enough clearance so it's not touching. Alright, so we're going to start off with jacking up the car, and then we're going to take out the lug nuts with the 21mm socket. Alright, so just to give you guys a quick rundown, I'm going to show you guys which bolts we're going to take off. So we're going to start from the top. We're going to take off the strut, the top strut bolts, or top strut nuts, as well as the upper control arm bolt, the casting nut right here. We're gonna take off this end link, as well as these ABS brackets right here, and lower strut nut. And then from the bottom, we're gonna take off these two bolts right next to the lower ball joint nut. Oh yeah, I also forgot that we're also gonna take off this right here so we can torque that down and pretty much take that off later. But yeah, let's get started with the install. Alright, so we're gonna get started with the first one. We're gonna take off this bolt for the ABS bracket on the upper control arm. Whether you're gonna change out your upper control arms or not, it's always good to take this off so you can give this line more slack so it doesn't rip off when you drop the suspension down. So with the 10mm wrench, we're gonna take it off. So once you have it off, just thread the bolt back in so you don't lose it, because for sure I'm gonna be losing this if I don't put it on. So up next, with the 12mm wrench, we're gonna take off this bolt right here. So once you have the bolts out, you're gonna take off this bracket. Alright, once you get that off, you're gonna want to kind of just like slowly move it out of the way, because there's a hard line right here. So just slightly massage it and bend it out of the way, and then put the bolt back on. So next we're gonna take off this bolt that holds the end link. So with the impact gun and a 17mm socket, we're gonna just break it off, but don't take it out all the way. And what you want to do is get a sledgehammer or a mallet and just tap it out. After you get that, you can take off the boat, maybe tap it a little more just to get out as much as possible. And we're just gonna tap it out. Alright, so once we tap the end link bolt out, notice there's a little bit of tension and I can't pull it out. So to relieve the tension, we're gonna have to drop the sway bar by taking off the 2 bolts on each side that holds the sway bar. So it's gonna be 2 14mm bolts on each. So I already took off this side. I'm gonna go ahead and take off the other side so I can drop the sway bar. So what I did is I actually just loosened up the other side because I already have the other side installed and I don't want to take the whole thing off, because putting on that bracket plus the sway bar bracket is a little bit tough. So I actually just loosened it up just a little bit so I can get a little bit of slack, and then I just got something so I can tap the bolt out. But I would definitely take off the sway bar. It will definitely make it a lot easier. Also, I highly recommend right before you do the install, you might want to take your wheels off and see if your end links are going bad. And I actually went ahead and got brand new ones. So just to give you an idea what my end links look like, see that I ripped the boot right there. And here is the new one that I got from rockauto.com. This is from Moog. Definitely have some good prices on stuff like this on rockauto.com, so I definitely check it out if you're looking for parts. Alright, so the next step, we're going to take off this castle nut. So in order to do that, you're going to have to take off this cotter pin right here. So just go ahead and wiggle that out. There you go. So, looks like that. So, in order to take that castle nut out, you're going to use a 19mm socket. I'm using my impact gun to get that out. So next step, we're going to pop off this upper control arm from the spindle. So what you can do is you get a sledgehammer and you're going to tap it right there. Don't tap it on this side, tap it on this side. So it looks like it's not going to budge. So I'm going to use my jack, and I'm going to actually lift it up from the lower control arm to see if I can loosen up the tension on that. Alright, so I tried to lift it up. You see, came right out. So as soon as I lift up the lower control arm, it actually loosen up the tension. So right now I'm going to go ahead and take off the upper control arm since I'm switching it out. You actually don't need to take off the upper control arm if you're going to leave it stock. But since I'm going to do it, I'm going to go ahead and take it off. It's going to make it a lot easier taking off this shock right here and putting it back in. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and get a 12mm socket, and we're going to go ahead and take off this bracket right here, and then we're just going to move it over just a little bit so we can get enough space to take off this nut for the upper control arm. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. With the 12mm wrench, we'll go ahead and take it off. So we're just gonna go ahead and just move that over a little bit. So there is a hard line right here, so just be careful when you move it over. So I'm just gonna move it just a little bit over so I have enough space to take off this. And I believe it's a 19mm socket. So with a 19mm socket, I'm gonna go ahead and loosen it. If I can fit my impact gun in there. And just like that, bam, it's off. So this is gonna be the fun part. So we're gonna take off this washer, and then you're gonna have to fish out this bolt from the engine bay. So I'll show you guys that right now. Just gonna give it a good tap so it started. So it does look like the bolt is contacting this part of the or the wheel well, so I'm gonna just grab a plier and I'm just gonna bend it outwards. Just give myself a little space. Just use a plier and just slowly just bend it outward just a little bit, just so you have enough space. Alright, so that should be good. I didn't have to do this on the passenger side, so just keep in mind. Alright, so you want to kind of just fish out as much as you can while you're under here and kind of just wiggle the upper control arm up and down until you can't anymore. So I'm going to see if I can bang it out from in here a little bit more, just to make it easier, but it looks like that's as far as I can go, so I'm going to have to go into the engine bay and then we're going to see how we're going to fish it out. So we're going to have to fish it out from the engine bay right here. So I'm looking on the driver's side and it looks like it's hitting a little zip tie that's holding some of the battery harness. So I'm gonna have to move that out of the way and then fish it out from in there. But a little quick tip on the passenger side, since I already did the passenger side, what's gonna help you is that taking off this power steering bracket, which is 3 bolts right here, actually helps you fish out the upper control arm bolt on this side. So you're gonna wanna kind of push the power steering reservoir forward towards the engine and kind of have something in between the reservoir and the side of your chassis to hold it in this position. And once you have it in this position, it's actually a lot easier to get it out. So just to keep in mind, that's a little tip that I figured out yesterday. So yep, good luck. Go right into the engine bay to take off the upper control arm bolt. So what I went ahead and did is I actually took off the battery right here. And once I removed the battery, I had enough space, and I noticed that the bolt was hitting this little bracket. So I think with the 10mm socket, you can take off this bolt and the bolt should come right off. One little quick tip that I learned is every time you disconnect the batteries on the GX, it'll reset the ECU. So what happened to my car is it stalled out when I was driving down to the alignment shop at Pit Garage. And pretty much what happened is I was just in drive and then I hit a stoplight. Once I came to a complete stop, the idles kind of dropped all the way down and it stalled out the car. And then what happened was I put it back in park and I was able to restart the car and kind of like just drive it back. But every time I went to a stop, the car stalls out. So I talked to my buddies at Pit Garage and they told me that I would need to drive it for a couple days so the ECU can relearn the idles, since these have a electronical drive-by-wire, I believe, and not a mechanical one. So every time you take out the battery, it'll reset the ECU. So the ECU has to relearn it. So just to keep in mind, if you want to take off the battery to make it easier, you're gonna have to drive the car for a little bit and kind of have to deal with that for a couple days before the ECU relearns it. Or you can avoid it by trying to leave the battery on, and you might be able to stick a socket under the battery and take off that little bracket that was under there, so you don't have to deal with this. I think once you take off that bracket, you should have enough space to kind of maneuver the bolt out, the upper control arm bolt out. So just to keep in mind, so you don't have to deal with it, because yeah, I definitely freaked out when I was driving down. I was like, holy crap, my car is already breaking down. It's feeling like my 240SX. We got it out. What we're going to do next with the Allen key, we're going to take off these 2 bolts on the side, one in the front, one in the back, that holds this, I believe is a height control module. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to have to take it off. So, broke it loose. Ooh. Alright, so once you take off the 2 Allen bolts, you want to just set this aside, and then on top of this bracket there's going to be a 17mm bolt, or 17mm. So once you take off the 2 Allen bolts, you move this module to the side, and on top of this bracket, there's gonna be a 17mm nut. So with the socket, we're gonna take that off. All right, so once you get that off, just pull this thing out, that, and there you have it. This is what it looks like. So 17mm nut. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna loosen up these nuts right here. It's 14mm. All right, so what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna go ahead and loosen this bolt that holds the bottom of the shock. It's a 19mm nut, so with the impact done, 19mm socket should come out pretty. All right. All right, so what we're gonna do next is we're gonna go ahead and take off those two 19mm bolts that's right next to the lower ball joint. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. I actually set a jack right under the lower control arm so it doesn't drop on my face. Cool, so now the two bolts are out. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna actually pop this bolt out. So I'm gonna use something to tap it out with a hammer. So I'm gonna just leave that in place just so it holds the lower control arm. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead and undo the top bolts right here from the upper strut. So again, with the 14mm socket, just take it out. And that should drop right down. So luckily I had the jack right under the lower control arm, so it didn't fall all the way down. Alright, so now I'm gonna take out the entire shock. So alright, so the next step is to put in the new shock. What's nice about this is that I don't need to actually have to get a spring compressor to put in the top pad and everything. Everything's already assembled. I'm just gonna lower the lower control arm just a little bit more. Just give me a little bit more space. And I should be able to slide this in. So I'm gonna go ahead and jack up the lower control arm so I can bring it back up. So they gave me 3 bolts to put on top. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a little bit of anti-seize on top. I don't know if you can see it. Yep. So just a dab. And I'm gonna start bolting up the top part of it. Now time to go for the second bolt. So what I'm doing right now is I'm tightening the top bolt so it can raise the shock up, so I can position the bottom. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna grab the bolt and I'm gonna stick it in from the inside out. So the back of the bolt is gonna be facing the back of the car. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna grab something and I'm gonna use it to tap in the lower bolt. All right, so what I'm gonna do next, I'm gonna go ahead and just thread back on the nut for that lower bolt. And get it pretty tight, but don't torque it down just yet. You want to torque it. You want to torque this down when you have the car down. So here's the rest of the hardware that SPC provides for you. So they gave you 2 washers and 1 casting nut with the cotter pin. So let me show you how to position the washers. So the washers, you actually want the side that bulges touching the upper control arm. So like this. See the side that bulges sitting on this side. And you're gonna do the same thing on the other side as well. The side that bulges right here, it's gonna touch that part. And then that's how it goes in. So we're gonna go ahead and just install the upper control arm. So reusing your factory bolt, you're gonna stick the washer in. And then start getting it on. So as you're fishing it through, one thing to keep in mind is make sure your ABS line is sitting outside of the upper control arm. Make sure it's not sitting in between here. So. Alright, so once you got it fully through, you want to get your washer, and with the side that bulges, that's going to be the side touching this end of the upper control arm. So just gonna get the nut and thread it back in. After that, I jacked up the lower control arm so I can put this ball joint in the spindle. So I got it in just like that. With the castle nut that they provided, go ahead and just thread that in. Just gonna get it slightly snug with a 21mm socket. Have it sit at the end of this part of the upper control arm, and then have it adjusted when we do the alignment. Alright, so after the castle nut, we're gonna go back down right here, and we're gonna put back on the two bolts that sit right next to the lower ball joint. So looks like they put some red Loctite on it. I only have blue at the moment, so just for now, I'm just gonna run the blue. You want to kind of look from up here and just align it the best you can, and then you go back down and pretty much align it from right here. It looks like it's pretty good. Alright, so the next step, we're gonna go ahead and reinstall the sway bar. But before we do that, we're gonna install the sway bar drop bracket along with the external reservoir bracket. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna put the sway bar, I mean not the sway bar, the reservoir bracket first. Then I'm gonna sandwich it with the sway bar drop bracket. And I'm gonna be reusing the OEM hardware for this right here. It's a 14mm. So this is how I'm gonna install it. So the threaded side is gonna be on the side that's gonna be facing the front. So go ahead and just hand tight it as much as you can. And since the holes on the bracket for the external reservoir are slotted, I'm gonna shift it to the front so I can gain more clearance from the upper control arm. Once I got it pretty snug with my hands, I'm gonna go ahead and use an impact gun. And I'm gonna come back with the ratchet, and I'm gonna just tighten it. Just gonna get it pretty good and tight. I mean, don't over torque it, but yeah, just get it pretty snug. All right. So what I did behind the scenes is actually I went ahead and torqued these to 47 foot-pound torque. So go ahead and make sure you torque that down. All right, so after you get those drop brackets on, now it's time to mount the sway bar back on. So with the hardware given from Icon, it's a nut and washer. I'm gonna use that along with this bracket, and make sure you you face it to the right side. So there's an arrow on this. I'm gonna make sure the arrow is facing forward and bolt them on. And by the way, if you haven't done your passenger side yet, I would actually hold off on installing the sway bar because you're gonna need it off, take off the end link. So using the 14mm socket again, I'm gonna drive it in. And then I'm gonna come back with my torque wrench and I'll torque it down to 47 to 50 foot-pounds of torque. All right, so the next step is to use these clamps to mount on your external reservoir. So I'm gonna just slip them in right there. Slip this one in as well. The brackets have slots on it, so that's where you put the clamps. So I'm gonna grab the external reservoir, and I'm gonna slip it in, and then I'm gonna start tightening it with the flathead. Alright, looks like it's pretty solid. Alright, so the last and final step is torquing everything down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a jack under my lower control arm, and I'm actually going to just raise it up. But I'm going to start off with this top nut right here. So SPC says that I'm supposed to torque this down to 150 pounds. So with a 32mm socket, you're going to use it to torque down the top nut on top of the upper control arm. Alright. Next up, we're going to torque down the castle nut to around 81 to 82 foot-pound of torque. And then you also want to position the nut so you can put the cotter pin in. So the next step is I'm gonna go ahead and tighten this nut right here. So using a 19mm socket with the torque wrench, I'm gonna go ahead and torque it down to 85 foot-pounds. You can go ahead and reinstall this hard line right here back onto the frame. So I'm gonna use a 12mm wrench and just get that in. I forgot one crucial thing too, is also always double check your work. Since I don't have a second pair of eyes, I'm gonna go ahead and just use a marker, and I'm just gonna mark the ones that I already torqued down. So. And I'm going to torque this down to 52 foot-pounds of torque. So using a 17mm socket, I'm going to go ahead and torque it down to 52 foot. Go ahead and just mark that. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and tighten down the top bolts that mount onto the top of the shock. I believe the torque spec on that is 47 foot-pounds of torque. Alright, so I put the wheels back on and I dropped it back to the ground, and the last thing we're going to torque down is the lower shock bolt. I'm going to torque that down to 100 foot-pounds of torque, and then I'm going to torque the two bolts next to the lower ball joints to 118 pounds. Got the extension, and now it's time to rock. Alright, so the last step for the front is to go ahead and grease the upper ball joints for the SPC control arm. So what you want to do is you want to go get your grease gun with grease in it, and then pretty much there's a little nipple right here, and you just kind of just attach the grease gun in and kind of give it a pretty good solid grip, and then start pumping. I believe SPC said to put around 5 to 10 pumps, so I'll just keep going until you see a little bit of grease coming out of the bottom, or you can kind of feel it. You don't want it to be like super bulgy, but you just gotta make sure there's some grease in there. Yep, looks like I'm done greasing it. Yeah. And after that, just go ahead and just clean off the nipple and you're pretty much good to go. Now we can go ahead and start on the rears. All right, so if you made it this far, that means you finished the fronts. Go ahead and give yourself a pat on the back. Maybe go grab a beer or juice box or something, because you definitely deserve it, because the front side is definitely the hardest. Now it only gets easier from here because the rear is actually a lot easier. So let's go ahead and start with the rears. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pretty much jack it up from the rear diff, and I'm gonna take both wheels off. Gonna place the tire. Alright, so to get started with the rears, I'm gonna go ahead and take off this bolt right here. So I believe it's a 17mm socket. Yep. Alright. Alright, next up, I'm gonna go ahead and unclip this. And then I'm gonna use some channel locks, and I'm gonna hold the shocks with the channel locks. And then I'm gonna go ahead and loosen this top nut with a 17mm wrench. Alright, just gonna leave a couple threads on the top. And then, so with a sledgehammer, I'm just gonna bang it out. There you go. After you get the bottom, go ahead and take off the nut. Alright. And then you can easily just pull off the shock just like that. And then I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the other sides. All right, now that you got both shocks off on both sides, we're gonna go ahead and use a 12mm wrench or socket, and we're gonna go ahead and take out the sway bar brackets. So we're gonna take it on both sides. So there's gonna be two 12mm bolts right here, and then two on the other side. So go ahead and take both sides off. So I got the driver's side down, so I'm gonna go ahead and do the passenger side, and I'll be right back. All right, so next up, I'm gonna go into my wheel well, and we're gonna pull off this clip right here. I don't know if you can see it. It's right in the center. We're gonna go ahead and pull off that clip. I believe that clip should be holding on to one of the lines for our airbags. So you can use maybe like a wrench or something to tap it out. I'm gonna actually just grab my pliers, and then bam. I have no clue where it went, but it's off. So I'm gonna actually do the same thing to the other side, and we'll move on to the next step. So just to give you guys an idea what the clip looks like. So pretty much you just gotta get something and just push it out. I mean, I didn't really use a lot of force. All right, so the next step is to remove this airline that connects to your airbags, so you can deflate the airbag, so you can take it off. So what I did was I squeezed this little clip right here, and I pulled it out of the way, and I got some pliers right under, and I just yanked it out, and then you should hear like a full blast of air. I would definitely recommend wearing some safety glasses, because you don't want freaking bunch of mud in your eyes. Now it's deflated, it should be able to just come right off, just like that. And bam! So the next step is to install the rear coil conversion kit from Apache Off-Road. The washer that they provided is a little bit too small. I mean, it barely covers the hole. If you slightly misalign it, the washer can fall through. So what I did is I actually went ahead and got bigger washers. So I'm gonna use this washer from my rear shocks. I mean, I'm gonna probably throw them away, so I'm just gonna use this so I can get the install out of the way. But definitely go ahead and go to the hardware store and get bigger washers, because I don't think it's safe to run with those tiny dinky washers. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just install the pucks first. So I have the bigger washer on the inside, so I slipped it right here. Watch, it's gonna go right under along with the nut. So I'm gonna put the washer in first. Once I got the washer in, I'm gonna put on the nylon nut that they provided. After that, a 19mm wrench to hold the bottom part. I'm gonna go ahead and tighten it with a socket on top. So I'm gonna slip this rubber piece on top and go ahead and tighten it. Yeah, so I couldn't quickly find the torque spec online, so I'm just gonna get it pretty snug. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go on the other side and I'm gonna put a jack under the other end, and I'm gonna go ahead and lift it up. And as I lift the other side up, this section is gonna go down so I can have enough space to put the spring in. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead and put the spring in. I picked up these top isolators from Moog. It's nice to have it so you don't have metal to metal contact. So this will give it a little extra cushion and make it a little bit quieter. All right, so right now I'm right under the rear section of the car. Just want to take note, make sure your rear springs are seated properly. So earlier, this spring was actually sitting right here. So I actually had to bring the this axle back down so I can push this spring forward. So make sure it's seated properly. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get on with installing the rear shocks. So this is how it comes. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take off this top washer and I'm gonna take off this top bushing. I'm gonna go ahead and slide the shock in and I'm gonna put it through the top. And I noticed though, pretty much what I had to do was I had to jack up the other side of the axle so I can push this side of the axle all the way down. I really just got my mallet and or my sledgehammer and I just lightly tapped it in, and then as you can see, I got it in. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna go ahead and put the bushing back on. So it looks like this is kind of in the way. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my pliers and try to make space. I'm gonna slowly squeeze the bushing back in. Just keep in mind when you're doing the other side, make sure you put the bushing in before you start putting in the bottom. I was able to squeeze it in and got that on. And then after that, I'm gonna go ahead and put the washer on top and we'll start putting the top bolt in. Next up is I'm gonna go ahead and put the bottom bolt in. I'm gonna grab a little bit of anti-seize and I'm gonna put it on the bolt. Just a little bit of anti-seize, and then I'm gonna go ahead and bolt it back in. So with the 22mm wrench and some channel locks, I'm gonna go ahead and tighten it. All right, so I got that one pretty tight. Pretty much you want to just get it pretty good and tight, and you want to see the bushing bulge a little bit. So all right, so once you finish tightening down the top nut and the bottom bolt of the rear shock, we're gonna go ahead and start mounting on the external reservoir. They pretty much provide these two rubber clamps, and you pretty much just self tap it into your wheel well. Well, seems pretty snug. So after I do this, I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the other side, and then we can go ahead and start bolting back on our rear sway bar, and after that we can torque everything down and we should be done with the install. Alright, so pretty much the last thing we have to put on is the rear sway bar. So we're just gonna go ahead and reinstall it with the 4 bolts. I forgot to mention earlier, but make sure all the bolts have a couple threads in before you start tightening it. Because if you tighten one side without installing the other side, you're gonna have a really hard time aligning it. So, yeah. All right, so pretty much the last step is to put your rear tires back on, or your rear wheels back on. And we're gonna go ahead and torque that bottom bolt that holds the bottom of the shock. And after that, you're pretty much good to go. So we're gonna go ahead and torque that to 72 foot-pounds of torque. All right. All right, so the last and final step is to pull off the relays and fuse for the air suspension. So going into the engine bay, you're gonna go ahead and take this cover off. It's pretty much 2 plastic nuts right there and then 2 clips on top. So as soon as you pop those off, you're gonna get something that looks like this. And then you can go ahead and pop off this box right here. And what we're gonna be pulling off is so the last fuse is going to be right under your dashboard, so you're going to pull this side out, and then let's see. So we're going to go ahead and pull off. I don't have needle nose pliers, so I'm just going to use some scissors and just take it out. Whew, it's like pulling off teeth. But after you do those 3 things, you should be good to go. But yeah, this is pretty much what it is. The ride feels pretty comfortable at the medium settings. I mean, I'm gonna probably set up to a little bit more soft just to make it a little bit more comfortable for the road. From there, I'll be closing out the video. If this video helped you out, please smash that like button, hit that subscribe, and comment down below if I said something, if you need to correct me or something, or if you need to say what's up. But I'll hope to see you in the next video. Peace.